Not that we should be, but the kind of scuba diving or that sort of stuff happens on that vessel. So, name's Chris Winslow, director for both Ohio Sea Grant and Ohio State University Stone Laboratory, and I report up through Ohio State University's College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. The building you're seeing at the top of the hill is our dorm, so there's 12 rooms, 4 students stay in each room, so 48. 48 total. Jay Cookie, patriotic financier of the Civil War, so proposed, this commemorates Commodore Perry in the Battle of Lake Erie. So this was built first, and then when the National Park System got enough money together to build the other monument, so this is the first Perry's monument.
I had no idea there were 2 Perry's monuments.
Look at that.
So Chris, as we've been walking along the island, and just a beautiful, lot of history here on this island. And really, as we look at the H2Ohio program, there's even some history before H2Ohio addressing some of these issues as harmful algal blooms.
So H2Ohio, right? So governor's boots on the ground, shovel-ready projects. Prior to H2Ohio coming out, he funded what was called the Ohio Department of Higher Education Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative. And basically it's $2 million a year to address HABs research questions. So Sea Grant, within the Ohio State University College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, approaches state agencies, DNR, Health, Ag, EPA, to identify what research questions they wish they had answers to related to nutrients and HABs. And so we fund that research. And what's been great, that's been happening since 2015, since the Toledo crisis. But since H2Ohio rolled out, H2Ohio has been using those research findings to inform practices and things on the landscape. So it's one of those examples of a governor-funded H2Ohio and the governor-funded Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative under the Ohio Department of Higher Education really feeding into each other. So you've got research to inform practices, and those practices are then back informing the research. So in the state of Ohio, when I get to travel to Florida or Michigan or Indiana with some of my colleagues, the investments in the work and the cutting-edge stuff that's happening in Ohio, it's impressive. And other states and regions are really impressed with it.
So Chris, we're here on Stone Lab, a lot of research that goes on in a lot of different areas. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of that research and specifically some of the really cool projects that are going on and the difference it's making.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so lots of questions. We're never at a loss for questions here. But some of the research really is we recognize that as we, why do we care? Like, why are we doing this research? And for me, what it is that we recognize in the state of Ohio, and whether it's I talk to somebody that lives here or that works for an agency or that is an elected official, is that there really is no difference between a healthy environment and a healthy economy. And so when we fund research through Sea Grant in our role with Ohio State University under the college, is that we don't want to just fund science for science sake. We want to fund science that can inform behavior, that can inform policy, and that can inform management. Because again, all 3 of those things, good policies, good agency management, and good behavior by our citizens, we clean up this lake. And it's not just, as I mentioned, for the lake's sake. A healthy lake means a healthy economy for the communities that live in and around this watershed.
As we take a look, though, it's everybody's responsibility and everybody's job. You guys are here to do the research, and great research. And you said sometimes the answers we get lead to more questions, to more research. But in that, it's also extracting that information, not only making decisions, but then applying that in management practices back on the farms that can hopefully make a positive difference as the water flows down the river.
100%. And part of our role is not just that research. A Sea Grant program, a land grant program under the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences is to educate too. So we've got college students that are engaged in this research. Here on Stone Laboratory, we've got 5th through 12th graders coming up. And so it's not only research to inform management decisions, but it's that change in behavior too. And so it's grabbing those students that maybe if you didn't reach their mom and dad, that student is going home and saying, guess what I learned about harmful algal blooms and invasive species and water quality. So it is your land grant institutions are really all about that 3 legs of the stool, the research to inform formal education and both research and education to inform outreach, so engaging those local communities. So here with Ohio Sea Grant and OSU Stone Laboratory, again, based out of the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, we're not doing a lot of the work up on the edge of the field and up in the rivers. Most of our stuff happens here on lake proper. And so we do want to know what happens with different forms of nitrogen in the lake, how much phosphorus is really driving these blooms. We know a lot more now about toxicity and the productions of toxins, even the genetics of these organisms. We now know that certain genes have to be present for a cyanobacteria to actually produce the toxin. So those genes aren't there, then the toxin isn't produced. Winter ice. We're starting to wonder, how much does the winter before a bloom season impact that bloom? If you have heavy ice, you do have organisms living underneath that ice. So how do they change the nutrient dynamics in the system? And those changes, do they really matter for the summer? So there's a lot of work here on lake proper about mixing of the lake, warm water years versus cool water years, ice years, no ice years, how much nitrogen, what form of nitrogen. All of that work is happening here up at OSU's Stone Lab and through the Sea Grant program. You know, the amazing H2Ohio program and investments and what the farmers and producers have been stepping up to do. Statistically, at the end of that mouth of the Moami, we're not seeing a drop down. The reason part of that is because when we say, are we making progress, you're kind of looking at multiple years rather than the one you're in, because some are going to be wet years and dry years and wet years and dry years. So statistically, I wouldn't say that that's the case. I would say if you look at the last 2 or 3 years, they do look like you're seeing a tendency towards a lower loss of phosphorus from the fields and therefore a phosphorus input into the river. What I always tell folks is, you know, we had this target, this year target, 2025 target of a 40% reduction. I would say that under the H2Ohio program, although amazing and great, that's a 3-year window of things that have been out there. And folks often forget that when you move that money into those agencies, that money can't go out the door very quickly. You have to build those programs. You have to make sure what you're going to require and are asking farmers to do. You have to have a sign-up process. So even though H2Ohio has been in place for quite some time now, some of those practices didn't go out overnight. And then we've also talked about some of those practices that go out there. You don't get an instant stop or drawdown of those nutrients. There's often a lag effect associated with those. So what I would say, the science that's driving what the agencies are doing and what the governor is funding under H2Ohio, I think they're the right practices, right? Again, subsurface placement, you know, grass waterways, crop rotation, cover crops. The data is showing you're in the right space, right? We just forget about how many acres are in that watershed. And we also forget about that lag effect in the time it takes to get these programs fully implemented in the field. All the models and the data that we're pulling in says we need about 70% of the acres in that watershed deploying practices. And that's not one practice for field, that's stacked practices, right? So are you doing drainage water management and subsurface placement? Are you doing edge of field buffers and subsurface placement? So 70%, right? So when I say more, it's easy to put a percentage out there, but we often forget what it takes to get those practices in the field, right? Subsurface placement, that's one of the ones that's showing the best results as far as slowing loss of those nutrients applied. Those toolbars that need to be pulled behind those tractors are not cheap. Cover crops, not necessarily addressing phosphorus. We're not seeing drawdowns associated with that, but we are seeing they help a little bit with nitrogen and water management. But those cover crops, that's a new tool. It's a new practice that a farmer's got to learn how to put it out there, when to drop it back down again. So we just got to remember that maybe some of these things, you know, soil testing and right rate, maybe a little bit more palatable and easier. Right timing, not in front of a storm, not on frozen ground. Yeah, you know, let's get those and let's put them out there. But some of these other things we're asking farmers to do, it's not that simple. Even grass waterways or buffer strips, right? When rain falls, that water is not coming off the edge of that field the same way. It is following paths of water. And so knowing where that buffer strip should be and how wide it should be, those are not trivial questions and easy things to deploy.
Chris, ever since the algal bloom, a lot of folks have been asking a lot of questions, and ultimately they want to see results. And so the H2Ohio program has come up. There's a lot of research that's been done. There's a lot of practices put in place. And quite frankly, in some cases, there's certain groups who their patience is starting to run a little bit thin. They want to see some results, and they want to be done with the research and just get on with it. Why can we not just get on with it? All this research and management and measuring is really important, ultimately, to solve the bigger issues.
100%. So when we talk about research, every time you conduct a project, you usually find out more questions, sometimes more questions than you do answers. And so all these research projects that give an answer, that doesn't mean we're done. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so, for example, when we talk about old phosphorus, that phosphorus that wasn't applied in a given cropping season, a percentage of what's coming off our fields and coming into Lake Erie is that old phosphorus. If we would have stopped research 6 years ago, we wouldn't have known that, right? Cover crops. We always hoped that cover crops would address our nutrients. Well, we're seeing that it does help a little with nitrogen and water runoff, but not really in the phosphorus space. I often say you can't manage what you don't measure. And so when we say research, we often think about just going out and collecting samples and gauging progress and what's there and when does it show up and when does it disappear. So it's a really complex problem. And usually when people think research, they just think about running experiments in a lab. There's a lot in the economics space also, in human behavior space. We've now found which practices we're asking our producers to do fit their behavior, fit their lifestyle, fit their pocketbook. And so research isn't just the white lab coat scientist in a lab. It's a lot of those hard-pressing behavioral questions. When we tell farmers you can't apply fertilizers before the rain or in the winter, that window of time they used to be able to be out in their field is now reduced.
Yeah.
What does that do in that behavior space? And we need to study and research that change in behavior. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I want to see the problem gone. And yes, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox, but by no means are we done with the research to inform the things that we have to do on the landscape.